Welcome to the 60th episode of our Crossing Thin Ice podcast series, where twice a month we tackle risk management topics. Our aim for these podcasts is to help with your ERM program and general risk knowledge. We encourage you to share with anyone interested in lifelong learning about risk management, and we welcome your feedback. My name is Max Rudolph, and as always, I'm joined by Dave Ingram. I'm learning from Dave about artificial intelligence every time we connect lately, so my role will be to feed him questions and let him respond. I think you'll have fun and learn something new. Let's get started. As a reminder, nothing in today's podcast is intended to be investment advice. We are here to provide educational material on risk topics without getting lost in the weeds. So Dave, you said there's two dominant myths about AI. What are they and how should we think about them?
So, Max, these two myths, and I see evidence of these two myths almost every day in people's thinking. One of them I think of as the Star Trek computer myth. If you watch particularly Star Trek The Next Generation, which, maybe that dates me, is that I use that as a cultural reference. But in that TV series, which I forget how long it ran, 9 seasons, 12 seasons, a long time, the computer was a continuing character in that series, and at any time, and any of the human characters might call out "computer," and then ask a question about any subject in the world, and expect the computer to know everything about it and to give a very useful and thoughtful response that may have included not just gathering information, but doing some unbelievable analysis of some difficult thing. That myth is of the omniscient computer as the helper for humanity. And the other myth is the one that was in several popular movies, the Terminator series movies and the Matrix series movies. And it wasn't the same AI myth in both of them exactly, but it was the same general myth, which was that once AI got to a certain level of capabilities, it would take over from mankind and either eliminate or greatly suppress mankind. It's the evil AI myth. And again, I hear references to that almost every day. Whether the people reference the movies or not, they reference the idea.
So why do you think these two views are so sticky?
I think people, as we've learned over and over again, certainly with social media, that it's the extreme views that get the most clicks. Those are definitely extreme views, both of them. Probably have seen a post if you do any social media at least once a day, if not 5 or 10 times a day, of somebody proving that any day now AI is going to take over and we are all toast. Whether it's just the early stages of that where AI takes over all of our jobs, or the final stages of that where, as in the Matrix, humans are put into pods and used as batteries.
Well, Dave, let's look first at myth one, the Star Trek computer version. If a risk manager buys into that belief, how do they end up using AI in their work?
The Star Trek computer, as I said before, it's infallible and all knowing and helpful as all hell. If you have that myth in the back of your mind or even in the front of your mind, you're going to tend to rely on the answers you get from AI. You're going to be uncritical about it, and you're eventually going to get to the point where you're going to wind up delegating important, complicated decisions to AI. I don't know if it's going to get to the point where it may be able to do that at some time, but it certainly isn't anywhere close to that now. So if somebody is kind of has that myth in their head, whether it's from watching the TV series or just for other reasons, then the issue becomes that over reliance.
So, Dave, what are some upsides to seeing AI in that way?
Well, certainly if you see AI in that extreme positive light, you're going to try and take advantage of the capabilities of AI. You're going to be a person who is an early adopter, perhaps. You're certainly going to be there getting advantages out of AI right away, and you may see some unbelievable pickups in terms of efficiency. The only thing that you may not see because you're not being critical is that some of the pickup is a sort of a false savings because you're getting a wrong answer fast.
Okay, but what's the trap? What's the downside to this strategy?
Well, the trap is that you sort of, one of the aspects of it is that the stage where AI is now, and certainly under the path which has been going on to develop, things like large language models, which are not based at all on the concept of true facts versus false facts. There's a heavy requirement in the use of AI for human oversight. And so if you believe that AI doesn't need that oversight, you're likely to approve applications of AI that don't include budgeting for that human oversight. And so your cost benefit trade off will be skewed in favor of benefits and not recognizing all the costs. And what'll happen then is it'll go along fine, perhaps for a while, and then it'll hit a bump, and you won't have prepared for that. You won't have people in place that are ready to be fixing those bumps and noticing them before they do damage. So that's kind of the downside.
So still thinking about the Star Trek computer mindset, how does it affect how people manage AI risks?
Well, the risk list is going to be very short for those folks. That's the first step in risk management, identify your risks. And so people that believe in that Star Trek myth won't be identifying very many risks of AI. In fact, the biggest risk that they might identify is the risk of being a late adopter, of missing out. Those folks are going to put minimal resources to risk management of AI risk, and they're going to be prioritizing development over assessment and mitigation of AI risks.
Well, Dave, isn't there a danger in assuming the risk is already taken care of?
There certainly is. Sometimes there's a little bit of justification of that, but often there isn't. For instance, recently I tried to prepare for a presentation where I showed examples of AI bias. And what I found was that a lot of the issues related to bias were taken care of, that the designers of the AI systems uh, did include some kind of screens to keep the system from doing things that were really, really overtly biased. So I had trouble generating a problem situation. So that one at that level was taken care of. At a more subtle level, maybe not. That there could be situations that get past those screens that you have to look out for.
Okay, well, let's move on to the second myth, the Terminator or Matrix villain. This is clearly the darker myth. How does the risk manager approach using AI under this thought process?
I think it gets into the territory of, in football terms, what you call that prevent defense that teams shift into at a certain point in the game. And I forget what the exact time and score is that causes that shift. But or in baseball, when you move the outfielders in, there's all kinds of situations like that where you've changed the way you're approaching the risk to try and shut down almost all activity. That's the kind of thing that's likely to happen. If you believe in the Terminator Matrix villain myth, you're not going to be using AI. You're not going to be taking advantage of it so that your organization is going to be disadvantaged because their risk management team is not getting some of the efficiencies that other companies' risk management teams may be doing. The folks in the risk management team will be focusing on the worst case and possibly on a worst case that's a science fiction movie worst case rather than a real world worst case.
Well, it seems like a pretty big downside. Are there any upsides to being that skeptical?
If you were going to choose, you might want to have a person like that in the room if you have somebody that's a big follower of the Star Trek myth to kind of counterbalance that. You always want to have a pessimist involved in your risk management work to make sure that you are considering those worst cases. Worst cases. There's a lot of considerations in AI that are fairly well hidden. You know, AI is this black box kind of system. Somebody with that imagination for those worst cases, somebody with that fixation on those, may be actually able to help you identify some situations that aren't obvious, but that will show up if you use it for long enough in a wide variety of situations.
Yeah, it might be a role that somebody like me that has spent a lot of time looking at emerging risks, with the caveat that I don't look just at emerging risks that are downside. I look for upside ones as well. But with that fear-driven posture, what's the cost of that as you're looking at AI?
Well, the companies that let that view predominate will likely be very slow to innovate, very slow to use AI. So therefore, they may be falling behind competitors. To the extent that AI does work and does create efficiencies and cost savings and also extends capabilities of employees and so makes productivity higher, the company who is shying away from AI because of that negative perception, the Terminator myth, they'll be slow to do that. And I've certainly run into companies like that.
I imagine the same fear spills over into how someone would manage AI. What kind of risk lens does that give them?
What it might winds up doing is sort of shifting how they consider the possible scenarios. I mean, when you're doing risk management, you do a lot of looking at downside scenarios and looking at upside scenarios as well. But on the downside scenarios, what you wind up doing with that pessimistic view is sort of misinterpreting the likelihood of the extreme cases. The extreme cases are still there, whether you have the one view or the other. But if you're managing for AI takeover of the world as if it was a common risk, something that could happen in the next 10 years, you're going to put a lot more effort into that risk, which is going to just distract from managing from the risks that actually have a serious potential of causing problems in that time frame.
Yeah, it gets into some of the things we've talked about before with the difference between qualitative and quantitative. Sometimes you don't want to spend all your time building models around this. You can kind of look at it and say, well, if this happens qualitatively, here's what it might mean in a narrative. It can be the contrarian. You can look at further time horizons. With that in context, what gets missed when you focus on rogue AI takeovers?
What gets missed is the more likely possibilities. And this is a little bit convoluted because if you really, really are focused on those big bad things happening, you're probably not going to do much with AI. If you were doing something and you have a person that's focused on this, they wouldn't be putting much emphasis on the kind of day-to-day risks that exist in an AI system. To the extent that they drowned out the narrative from the folks that are working with the day-to-day system with their doomsday scenarios, then you wind up not paying attention to the things that could go wrong next week. Instead, you're looking at the things that could go wrong, by the end of the century.
So how do we move forward? How do we fix this?
We need a middle vision in between those extremes that's more realistic. We need to understand the system better. We need to somehow or other filter out the crazy stories that are the clickbait on the social media. Understand what the real capabilities of AI are. They are nowhere near as high as the capabilities of that Star Trek computer, and they're nowhere near as close to being able to take over the world as the Terminator computer. We need to find out what exactly it is. The thing I've said here more than once, and I say it as many times as people let me, with the current capabilities of AI, you always need a human in the loop. You always need to be checking what it's saying. If you get this realistic vision, though, you can take advantage of the really true strengths of the AI systems that exist now without falling into the trap of not preparing for its weaknesses.
So if a practitioner doesn't fall into the trap of buying into either myth, what's a realistic way to use AI?
Well, my thinking from doing a lot of personal use of AI has been to treat the AI system as a partner. And as a partner that you respect that they have really important and useful things to contribute to the work, but that you don't necessarily believe everything they say or take it without verification. So some of the issues that you get that I said, you need to be checking what AI is doing all the time. If you treat the AI system as a partner that you're having a back and forth conversation with, in effect, your natural tendency is to be skeptical at a very micro level, then, to be skeptical at each statement, rather than if the AI spits out a 5-page document, it takes a lot of concentration to do that. So I tend to use AI systems in small chunks. I tend not to try and say, oh yeah, here, write me this gigantic report. Thinking of it as something that extends my productivity. There are some really strong pluses to the AI systems.
So let's follow up on that. What are some of those pluses of working that way?
Google first came out with its search engine. That was a game changer. There were other search engines before that, but Google's worked a lot better. What it gave you was access to just an unbelievable amount of information. AI does the same kind of thing, but it allows you to be sloppier, let's say, with your questions. It allows you to so that with Google, what you had to learn was, well, how exactly do I phrase this so that it searches the right exact phrase or words? Whereas with AI, if you're asking it for information, you can use just a plain English sentence, and a lot of times it'll be able to figure out what you're looking for. And so it can contribute a lot of information to anything that you're working on. You do have to worry about whether or not it makes up some of that information, and you have to understand how its logic works so that making up information is not a flaw. That is the way it works. The other thing that I think of AI as having a real strong capability is looking at information and drawing connections between different pieces of information. So sometimes I feel really great when I do that personally. And what I find is I can just sort of start thinking about a topic and sort of throw the ball to AI and say, well, what are some other ways of thinking about this? And it'll throw back 3 or 4 things. In this collaborative vein, I'll say, oh, okay, I like the third one there. Let's talk about that further. And sort of go back and forth like that, letting it suggests some of the next steps in sort of developing or something. So those are the kind of the two kinds of strengths I see of AI that you want to take advantage of. There's more strengths. Those are the ones I particularly like.
Started to get into it a little bit, but where are the limits? Where do you still need to be careful?
I think it's difficult to work with AI on a subject that you're not knowledgeable about. When I'm working with AI on a subject that I know something about, I can usually, well, I think that I can usually notice things that it says that are just not quite right. The interesting thing is that when I challenge the large language model, when it says something that I don't think sounds right, it'll say, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to say that." So you do have to have either some knowledge or spend a lot of time checking So hallucinations are that. So the whole idea of just kind of validating the conclusions that you get out of AI. AI doesn't have any judgment, doesn't have any common sense. And the one statement that I've taken to using lately is that AI doesn't know the truth. Asking AI, for instance, I saw this a lot early, a year ago or something, when people would say, "Well, only give me true answers. Don't give me any of these." It has no idea what's true and what's false. That is not even a consideration in the development of AI. AI is a probabilistic system. So it gives you a sentence that it says that it thinks is the most highly likely good sentence in response to what you asked. And if it has put together a sentence there that just is not true, it doesn't know that.
Well, it seems
So
like job security for the person who has some knowledge about a topic. What does it look like to manage AI itself as a risk without slipping into panic or passivity?
managing an AI system is something you have to plan for in advance. Don't think it's a great idea to just turn an AI system on and then figure out how to manage it. I think you have to recognize that with the kind of limitations that we were just talking about, you're going to want to manage it continuously. And certainly that doesn't mean that you have to have a person checking every single statement that an AI system makes. Depending on what kinds of statements you're asking it to make, you may be doing just sort of random sampling every once in a while to check the logic. You certainly can fix some of the issues that I mentioned. The idea of hallucinations. AI doesn't go out and just randomly hallucinate. It hallucinates when you've asked it a question that it doesn't have a better answer than the wrong answer. So if you find areas where the AI is giving bad answers, you give it more information, and it'll start using the information you give it and giving correct answers. So those are some of the considerations in managing the AI system, is recognizing how often you need to oversee it and recognizing you can fix most of the issues that come up.
There's a lot of risk frameworks out there today developed by, a wide variety of risk managers, accountants, and others. Are today's risk frameworks really ready for AI?
AI doesn't fit simply into existing risk frameworks. There's a couple of aspects to it. The one we've been talking about hallucinations, and certainly there's other issues. I mentioned a while ago the idea that AI is a black box. That the way it was designed with thousands of hours of training. And so to really fundamentally understand mechanistic interpretability is, I think, the phrase that's used, to know exactly how it got the answer it got, you'd have to be able to back through that thousands of hours of training. So it's just impractical to actually achieve that mechanistic explainability. So you need to come up with new ways to be able to explain the AI system. And certainly there's risks involved because all of those explanation pathways are approximations. And anytime you're making an approximation, there's some risk of that. You have all the same issues with data that you have with any other computer system. Is that garbage in, garbage out. You have to be having a robust data governance process for that. And then there's the question of ethics comes in with bias is one of the most talked about areas of ethics relating to AI systems. And that's because of that probabilistic nature of AI, that if it's trained off of past actions and those past actions had an embedded bias in them or an overt bias in them, the new AI system will learn that bias and will keep applying it. So the risk management system has to be looking out for that. Sometimes, perhaps many times, those biases are easy to identify, but sometimes you might not even realize that your own history that you're training your AI system on was biased. But now that we have put that system into a structure that AI can use, we can identify biases that maybe we couldn't have without that.
So Dave, that's really interesting to talk about the two myths, but if you were advising a CRO or a risk team, what mindset would you recommend going forward?
The most important mindset feature to look at is that of continuous learning. You should never assume that you've learned all about AI, partly because AI keeps changing. Every couple of weeks, there's another major announcement from one of the different firms, and everybody else, all the other firms that support these AI models, rush to copy those. You have to keep doing that. You have to realize that AI works best when you use iterative processes. And I think you have to iterate the process of how you're going to do the risk management as well. You have to be ready to change and adapt your process all the time as you learn more. And I think prioritization is the big area where that's going to come up, is that you're going to find that whatever you thought you needed to pay attention to, maybe that's not the thing that's the biggest source of problems for you.
Okay, one last question. What's the one thing people consistently get wrong about AI?
It's not a person. What they've done with the large language models is made the AI capable of having a human-like conversation. What people slip into the thinking is that it's going to be responding like a person. And when you recognize that is all facade, an example of that I'll just finish up with is when I was looking for an explanation to how AI had come up with an answer, and I asked it an explanation, and it gives me this really interesting sounding explanation of a logical process it went through to get an answer. And then I went back and said, wait a minute, isn't your system basically probabilistic, and don't you not use logic to get your answers? And it says, oh yeah, and then it gives me a completely different explanation. No overlap with the first explanation. You just have to recognize that the second explanation is really what's going on under there, even if it has that first explanation, the human sounding explanation as what it's going to put forward first. Pay attention, it's a computer.
Well, thanks, Dave. That was enlightening, and hopefully everybody else learned as much as I did. We hope you have enjoyed this special episode of Crossing Thin Ice that walked through two myths we get from Hollywood about AI and some realistic solutions that practitioners can implement in their own work. If you found it valuable, please like, subscribe, and share with your colleagues.